New information released in the investigation into the murders of Rob and Michele Reiner. We now know where the couple was reportedly found dead inside their home on Sunday. Their son, Nick, is now in jail. He's facing 2 counts of first-degree murder. The 32-year-old has struggled with addiction for years, but it appears his parents did everything they could to help him until the end.
If your kid is going through rough times, the parent your main job is to keep your child safe.
That is an interview from 9 years ago that Rob and Nick did for AOL after they released a movie that they had worked on together. It's a haunting clip to watch now, knowing what allegedly happened after a holiday party attended by the Hollywood elite. We're on the case presented by Law and Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Hey guys, real quick, I want to talk about a big partner and sponsor of On the Case, one of the most watched shows on YouTube, Morgan & Morgan, America's largest personal injury law firm. They're a firm with over 1,000 attorneys who have recovered $25 billion for more than 500,000 clients. In the past few months alone, a client in Florida received $12 million when insurance offered just $350,000. In Pennsylvania, another client was awarded $26 million, 40 times the insurer's offer. Morgan & Morgan makes it easy to fight for what you deserve. You can even start a claim from your phone. So if you're injured, you can start a claim at forthepeople.com/OTC. You can also scan the QR code on this screen or click the link below. The causes of death for Rob and Michele Reiner confirm the fears of what the final moments were like for a Hollywood power couple. It's now official that the medical examiner in Los Angeles has ruled the Reiners' deaths to be homicides. Now, that's not a surprise considering everything that's been reported to this point, but it's really the way that they were allegedly killed that is just so disturbing, and where in their home they reportedly were found. Now, before I get into that part of the story, I want to get you the latest information on the legal front involving their son Nick, who is now facing 2 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of his parents. The charges also carry special circumstances for there being more than one victim. The Los Angeles District Attorney, he did mention the death penalty at a news conference earlier this week when he announced the charges, but it's important to note that there's a moratorium on the death penalty in California since 2019, and no one has been put to death in that state since 2006. Right now, Nick is in the LA County Jail. He did make his first court appearance yesterday on Wednesday, and he is being represented by a powerful name, and that is Alan Jackson. That's the same attorney who defended Karen Reed in her trials when she faced charges for allegedly killing her Boston police officer boyfriend, John O'Keefe. Now, Jackson got a not guilty verdict in the case of Karen Reed, but this case, it could be more difficult. Now, these are courtroom sketches of Nick Reiner. Yesterday, the judge said that the cameras in the courtroom could not take pictures of him. He was wearing a blue vest that is often worn by defendants to prevent them from harming themselves. Jackson told the judge that it was too soon to enter a plea of guilty or not guilty for Nick, so he asked for the official arraignment to be pushed to January 7th. The judge allowed that. Now, the only time that we heard from Nick during this hearing is when the judge asked him if he was okay with waiving his right to a speedy trial, and this is what he said.
Mr. Reiner, you have a constitutional and statutory right to speedy arraignment. Your counsel is requesting that your arraignment be continued to January 7, 2026. Do you waive your right to a speedy arraignment so that your arraignment can be heard on January 7, 2026?
So what you heard there, quote, "Yes, Your Honor." That's it. Now, the hearing was very brief, and now January 7th is circled as a day where those cameras will return to Los Angeles to see what happens next in court. Now, on the topic of Alan Jackson, before we get back to specifically Nick Reiner, one question that I know I've wondered is just how much could this defense cost? Jackson is one of the biggest names in criminal defense, and it's unclear what Nick Reiner really did for work. He certainly lived in an incredibly wealthy family. He apparently lived in his parents' guest house. He also worked with his dad on a movie that was released in 2016 that we're going to talk about in just a moment, but other than that, it doesn't seem like he really did much. Alan Jackson did an interview with Vanity Fair around the time of the Karen Reed trial, and He said that he gave Karen Reed, who is a professor of finance at a college in Massachusetts, not a wealthy person by any means, but he said he gave her a discount for her 2 trials. And he claims that the full price tag of Karen Reed's defense through 2 trials would have cost roughly $10 million. Now, Nick's case is certainly going to get a lot of publicity. Perhaps he gets a discount as well. Prosecutors and police have been very vague. They have been tight-lipped about this case, but there's been so much reporting that has come out through media outlets like TMZ and People reporting that the couple had their throats slit in their home. Well, now we're learning more official details about how the couple died. The medical examiner says the couple received, quote, multiple sharp force injuries. Multiple, a key word there. Police have said that the alleged murder weapon was a knife, but they have not confirmed if they actually still have that murder weapon and if it was a knife that came from the home or was it one that the alleged killer brought into the house. We also have new details about where the Reiners were found in the home. Now, we know that they were killed after a holiday party that was at the home of Conan O'Brien on Saturday night. And the Hollywood Reporter put out a big story that gave some background, some context, some specifics about what allegedly happened during this party that led to an incredibly loud argument, very public argument at this party between Nick and his dad, Rob. Now, we do know that Nick struggled with addiction since he was a teenager. He told people in 2016 that he first went to rehab when he was just 15 years old, and he had to go back to rehab more than a dozen times. He also said that he spent time homeless as he struggled with addiction in Maine and New Jersey and Texas. And there's also reporting that Nick's parents were growing more concerned with his state of mind recently. The Hollywood Reporter article that talks about the Conan O'Brien holiday party says that Nick actually wasn't on the invite list, but his parents, they were, and they asked Conan if it would be okay for their son to tag along, and Conan reportedly said yes. It does appear, though, that things got awkward and disturbing very quickly at this party. Nick was reportedly described as being erratic and is said to have wandered around this party where there are a lot of celebrities, and he was interrupting conversations. The Hollywood Reporter said that Nick demanded to know which partygoers were famous. Now, the article also goes on to say that Nick was reportedly acting so odd that some people at this party who didn't know who he was, they were wondering if this was a person who wandered in off the street. Here's the part of the story, though, that really stood out to me, because one of the people who Nick allegedly asked if they were famous was actor, comedian, former SNL star Bill Hader. The reporter writes, quote, Hader calmly responded to Nick that he was engaged in a private conversation. This is according to someone with knowledge of the situation. Nick glared at him for what felt like an uncomfortable amount of time, end quote. That really paints a picture of just how Nick seemed to have been acting in the hours surrounding the time that police now say he killed his parents. And that loud argument that made headlines, that was allegedly because Rob was confronting Nick about just how rude and bizarre he was acting at this party. Police and prosecutors have yet to officially give a time of when the Reiners were killed, but it obviously happened after this party, and perhaps it happened before 4 o'clock in the morning, because that is when media outlets are reporting that Nick checked into a hotel in Santa Monica, which is about 4.5 miles from his parents' house in the Brentwood neighborhood of Los Angeles. He reportedly checked into this hotel with a credit card. And then what staff found the next day is incredibly disturbing. Staff, when they went into the room to clean up the next day, they say they found blood all over the room in this hotel. The bed sheets also were covering the windows. So just an incredibly disturbing scene. Now, again, he checked into this hotel around 4 o'clock in the morning on Sunday. His parents were not found until 3:30 in the afternoon that day. According to KTLA, the couple was found dead in their bed. They had been stabbed multiple times. A massage therapist reportedly couldn't get in touch with the Reiners, so it was their daughter, Romy, who reportedly lived across the street, according to People, who went into the house and discovered what had happened. She apparently only saw her dad, Rob. And this part is just incredibly sad, and you can't imagine what it would be like, because it's being reported she didn't know that her mom was also dead. And first responders had to tell her that news later. Now, when the bodies were discovered, Nick was nowhere to be found, and Romy apparently was aware of the issues with her brother. And according to TMZ, she suggested that her brother was dangerous and he may have something to do with what had happened to her parents. Now, take a look at this here. Very important surveillance video that has come to light because this is Nick Reiner hours later at a gas station near the campus of the University of Southern California. This is Sunday evening around a spot called Exposition Park, roughly 15 miles from his parents' home. This was shortly before he was arrested by the LAPD around 9:30 Pacific Sunday night. NBC Los Angeles was the first outlet to get this video, and you can see Reiner's wearing a jacket and a hat. He has a red backpack. He appears to buy a Gatorade, and he walks across the street, and that is when you see the lights and the sirens and the LAPD pulling up and putting him under arrest. It's unclear what Nick's defense may look like going forward, especially if this case makes it to trial. But at the center of this case will be issues that he had in his life. Nick has been open about his battles with addiction. He wrote a movie called Being Charlie. It was actually directed by his dad. It was released between 2015 and 2016. The film was about someone who had struggled with heroin and homelessness. It was loosely based on Nick's life. One thing I noticed is, this film is not a Hollywood legendary movie like the ones that his dad directed. It only has a rating of 6.2 on IMDb. And it also doesn't appear that Nick really did much in the film industry after this movie. And Rob, who had directed some of the most prolific films in history, well, you look at this and you kind of speculate that him taking on this film was really more of an effort to bond with his son.
If your kid is going through rough times, the parent your main job is to keep your child safe.
Now that's Rob and Nick appearing together doing press for the movie Being Charlie. It's a clip from AOL's Build series, and this clip's now going viral on YouTube. Nick and Rob talk about what doing a movie together meant to their relationship.
I think the bonding came not from the story itself, but from the fact that we were working on a movie together.
Man, you watch that interview, and it really makes this story and it couldn't get any sadder, right? But it's even more sad because it really does appear that Rob and Michele Reiner tried to do everything they could for their son until the end. And for as much as Being Charlie was an example of progress, perhaps, that Nick was making in his life and battling addiction, he also said on podcasts, being blunt about the issues that he had staying sober.
Hey, what's up?
There he is, Nick Reiner.
We found an episode of a podcast that's called Dopey. It's one that focuses on the struggles that people have with addiction. And Nick Reiner was a guest on multiple episodes. This one is from roughly 7 years ago, and the hosts are talking to Nick about his history of addiction, and Nick talks about how he found himself wanting to go back to his old life.
So what ended your sober run?
I don't know. I just didn't want to be away from home, and I just wanted to come back home.
But you also wanted to get back to smoking weed and whatever. I'm not judging you, Nick. I'm just the show, there's a billion or there's thousands.
You know what it really was?
What?
You know what it really was? It was I kind of knew that I wanted to relapse, basically. Mm-hmm. I didn't even want to call it a relapse. I just wanted to get back to my old life of smoking weed, kind of taking some pills, doing whatever I wanted.
Yeah.
And I knew that if I started to do it back in Maine, I wouldn't really be able to do it.
On another episode, Nick talked about at one point his parents kicking him out of their guest house in 2018, which put him into a rage, and he says that he trashed the place. As so many people are mourning and waiting for more information on what happened after this holiday party and inside the home where the Reiners had lived for decades, Nick's siblings have released a statement. This is the statement, and we got this from CBS News. According to CBS News, the statement reads in part, quote, "Words cannot even begin to describe the unimaginable pain we are experiencing every moment of the day. The horrific and devastating loss of our parents, Rob and Michele Reiner, is something that no one should ever experience. They weren't just our parents, they were our best friends. We are grateful for the outpouring of condolences, kindness, and support we have received, not only from family and friends, but people from all walks of life. We now ask for respect and privacy, for speculation to be tempered with compassion and humanity, and for our parents to be remembered for the incredible lives they lived and the love they gave." You will notice in going through that statement, the two siblings make no mention of their brother Nick. Here's what his attorney said after his court hearing on Wednesday.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I just have a couple of quick words. First of all, and most importantly, this is a devastating tragedy that has befallen the Reiner family. We all recognize that. Our hearts go out to the entire Reiner family. There are very, very complex and serious issues that are associated with this case. These need to be thoroughly but very carefully dealt with and examined and looked at and analyzed. We ask that process you allow the system to move forward in the way that it was designed to move forward, not with a rush to judgment, not with jumping to conclusions, but with restraint and with dignity and with the respect that this system and this process deserves and that the family deserves. So with that, we are set for January 7th for an arraignment. That's the next court date, and that's all I have to say at this point. There may be more at some other point, but today we're going to rest on where we stand procedurally, which is this was a continuance of arraignment. Nothing happened today substantively. We'll be back for an arraignment in the same department on the 7th of January. We'll see you then.
Joining us now to talk more about this is Professor of Applied Forensics at Jacksonville State University and the host of Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. Joseph Scott Morgan, thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Great person to talk to is now we're learning more about what the medical examiner is seeing with Rob and Michele Reiner. When you look at what we know, reportedly they were in the bedroom.
Yeah.
We know that they were stabbed multiple times and it was with a knife. What does that tell you about, beyond the obvious, what happened here?
In our world, in the world of medical legal death investigation, it gets no more brutal than sharp force injuries. And that's actually what they have listed as the cause of death, not the manner. The manner is a homicide, or homicides, rather. So, anytime you think about sharp force injuries, Chris, that's up close and personal. It's not like you can do this at arm's length, okay? You have to be in this individual space, and you have to have a will to do this. This takes a tremendous amount of energy. All we have to do is look at Idaho, for instance, and any number of other cases involving edged weapons. It takes sustained attacking. It also takes, I don't know how to paint this. It also, to me, anytime I see this, and particularly when you're talking about multiple, you think of a maniacal person that's doing this, because one of the terms that we apply in death investigation to a knife attack where you have multiple injuries is actually overkill. And I'm not saying that that's what this is. It sounds like it, because we're getting reports that, the big thing has been like, throats have been cut. Well, they didn't say that, in the release. That's speculative. However, it's certainly plausible. And then and that's a slice or an incised wound. Then you have stab wounds. So there's two separate types of sharp force injuries that you can have. There's one other one that's called puncture wounds, but it's not related to this, not like with an edged weapon. So you think about stabbing. Stabbing is deeper than long in relative to the injury, and slicing or incising is longer, but it's more shallow. Okay. So let's just go with this idea that if throats were cut, and I've seen this over and over again, you have to have a victim that is in a kind of assured position where they're up against a surface and you can apply weight and pressure and drag the leading edge of that blade across the neck. I'm not saying that it's not possible, like in Hollywood, where you have some kind of slasher movie where somebody will come out of the dark and just slash somebody's throat. I guess that's possible. Most of the time, there has to be a considerable amount of force that is applied. You have to have the person pressed or anchored against something and then pressed down. That's what makes this all the more horrific, when you think about this.
No, it is. And especially, this hasn't been officially put out there, but the belief is that they were in their beds when this happened. They go to this holiday party, reportedly, this argument with Nick, Rob and Nick did, just about his behavior at this A-list holiday party at Conan O'Brien's house. Then they go home, and that's, we probably assume when, this alleged murder took place. But the fact that they were in their beds, he's charged with first-degree murder, so prosecutors believe that this was premeditated.
Oh, yeah.
The fact that they were in their beds, when it comes to prosecuting this case, how critical, if that is true, could that be to the story that the prosecutors are telling?
Wow, Chris, I'm glad you brought that. This is an excellent point. I've heard a couple of things. I've heard in bed, and then I've heard something else about a chair and maybe Michelle on the floor, but I've heard on the bed repeated numbers of times. Let me kind of break this down relative to any kind of premeditative event. First off, I think that the person that would perpetrate this would have to have very intimate knowledge of the goings-on, the workings in that house. First off, you got to know where the bedroom is, right? Okay. And then secondly, you'd have to know about the victims. What are their sleep patterns? You know, are Rob and Michele, are they commonly asleep at 2:30, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning? Or is like, you know, many times when people get older, you know, they rise in the middle of the night. Sometimes people sleep all the way through, and even the loudest thunderstorm won't wake them up. So you would have to have intimate knowledge of this. Now, if they are in bed, going back to my earlier supposition relative to the knife and being able to put pressure down, that would potentially open the door to the perpetrator having to get into bed with them. Let that sink in just for a second. And be atop of them and apply pressure anteriorly. Now, I guess you could do it posteriorly, you know, where the knife is wrapped around, or the hand is wrapped around the neck and the knife is drawn across. If it was in the bed, this is going to be a particularly, and it doesn't take a forensic scientist to state this is going to be a particularly bloody scene. There are multiple vessels that are involved just in the neck alone. And we're not talking about any other kind of, peripheral stab wounds that might be going on. Every time you drive that knife into the body, you're compromising this vascular structure, and you're going to bleed as long as you're alive. And you get into the vessels in the neck, particularly the carotid, and you get, this idea of arterial spray, and it just covers everything. And so that's something that, that they might be dealing with. That also goes to pattern, right? You can think about movement of an individual. Was blood tracked out of the room? Was it tracked into any of their spaces around the house? Was there an attempt, and I've seen this happen on scenes, an attempt of the person at the scene to go and clean themselves? But I got to tell you, there's one more bit to this. It's not that that it's unsaid. It's actually said, but it's very vague. In the listing relative to what the LA County medical examiner / coroner is saying, they're saying that not only was this multiple sharp force injuries, they're also saying other contributing factors, but they don't specify. It's intimate. Could this mean that they were bludgeoned in some way? And when I say bludgeoned, struck with a closed fist, knees, feet, hands, arms, or could it mean that, because we have people that, for instance, if they're traumatized like this and they've got underlying heart condition, was that a contributing factor? We don't know anything about toxicology. As you well know, you cover so many of these cases, we always have to wait for tox, right? They ain't going to have tox by now. So we can kind of check that off the list. But they're talking about these other contributing factors. I'm fascinated to find out what that is. Kind of spitballing this and thinking about it and rolling around in my brain now since this information has in fact been released.
I think at this point, based off of the media reports and LAPD, prosecutors, they haven't said much, but in Los Angeles, TMZ and People Magazine have sources everywhere, and they've been able to kind of piece together some of the places that Nick Reiner was on the night that all of this happened, from Conan's house. Then there's this kind of period of time that we don't know, and then he's at a hotel at 4 o'clock in the morning where apparently there was blood found in Santa Monica, and then he's arrested around 9:30 near USC, which is like 15 miles away. And his parents, their bodies found around 3:30 in the afternoon on Sunday. How is it that a medical examiner can determine roughly, I guess, how specific can it get when it comes to determining the time of death and knowing exactly when Rob Reiner and Michele Reiner were killed?
Yeah, again, another excellent question, Chris. And this is something that we're always asking. Is called PMI, postmortem interval. Now, it has been stated, I think maybe, or at least it's alleged, that one of the EMTs stated that they were rigid at that point in time, which gives you an idea that rigor had begun to set in. One of the first places that emergency medical technicians will check is the arm, They'll grab the arm, and if it's not flexing or it's kind of rigid like this, you know that they're headed toward development of rigor mortis in the peripheral areas of the body. Okay, it generally starts in the small, or you can appreciate it in the smaller muscles like the jaws, the eyelids even. Okay, people don't know that. And then it presents more after a longer period of time in the larger muscle groups, the arms and the legs. If there was an absence of flexation with the bodies, you're thinking, at least they're going to have to be down maybe 3-4 hours at least. And that's going to be kind of the best guess for us, because we not only look at the rigidity of the body, we look at postmortem lividity, which is the settling of blood, and then we also look at body temps as well. Because we're at 98.6. Most of the time at a scene, we will do a body temp reading as long as we're out there. And generally you expect after the first hour, you can lose about 2 degrees of body temp. So you figure after the first hour, you're going to be roughly 96 degrees after death. And then for every hour up until the 12th hour, you lose 1 degree of temp. Okay. And the old adage about the person's assuming room temperature, that's where that originates from. So once you get to that 12th hour, you're subject to all of the ambient environmental temperature like any inanimate object in that room would be. So there's a lot of speculative stuff that we do at the scene. Yeah. It's really hard to quantify though. But if they're rigid, I'm thinking they have to have at least been down 3 to 4 hours by the time they put their eyes on them.
And as far as the suspect, Nick Reiner, we know that he has battled demons in his life. Struggled with addiction since he was 15 years old. He's been public about that, and then apparently was acting just kind of awkward, odd at this, according to the Hollywood Reporter, at this holiday party. So maybe that's who he was, but he was off that night. We don't know if he was on a substance or not. But when he gets arrested, and I also think of the time that he potentially spent at this hotel where there was blood in the shower. So maybe he goes to the hotel, he showers or whatever it may be. He's arrested around 9:30. What type of evidence could you collect if he was consenting to it? What type of evidence can you collect off of a suspect like Nick Reiner in this case that potentially could link him to the crimes?
Well, certainly if the individual has not cleaned themselves thoroughly, you're going to have trace evidence of blood, because it's going to be commingled blood, Chris. So you're going to have mom's blood and dad's blood. All right. And people will have it. I've seen it in people's hairline. I've seen it on the back of their neck. Even though they're attacking from the front, you'll get cast off that lands on the back of the neck, and the person's not aware of it. They may have even showered. And obviously we have to go back to the room in Santa Monica, right? And there have been reports that have come out of there that the personnel that were there noted that there was a copious amount of blood, on the floor going into the bathroom. It looked like somebody had made an attempt to clean up. But yet you've got him on CCTV, a couple of times. This is the curious thing about it. You and I, over the years, I don't know how about you, but when I go to check in to a hotel at, 3 o'clock in the morning, if I'm arriving late, I'm eye to eye with somebody.
Right.
Okay. The person behind the desk, you give them a credit card, all that sort of stuff. What did they see? Did they appreciate anything on his person at that point in time? Or is this a room that he maybe had previously had? I have no idea. So that's part of the narrative I want to try to understand. Now, how do you check in to a house or into a hotel, motel, having come from a bloodbath, and there not be a noticeable speck? Was he wearing like an overcoat or something like this that would have, prevented anybody from kind of visualizing him? I think that's an interesting point as well.
And I also think too, like just this, and I'm sure you would say that, every crime scene is different. Every story is different. These are real people who lost their lives, and that is unique in and of itself. But for a medical examiner, 2 people stabbed in their bed by someone in that moment. I hate to use the word routine, but how common is this type of case for a medical examiner when it comes to your training and what you typically see? how complicated of an investigation is this from the medical examiner side based on what we know?
Yeah, that's in two parts. So it's not uncommon at all. As a matter of fact, I often tell my students at Jack State, where I teach, that you're more at risk with a person you share domestic space with than a stranger in a dark alley. People, I think Hollywood, they promote this narrative that, the stranger emerging out of the alley. That ain't the case. Most homicides that we cover nationwide, it just doesn't apply to LA, but everywhere, originate within the home, some kind of domestic issue. So this is nothing rare, okay? The fact that edged weapons were used, not necessarily rare at all, because, people talk a lot about gun violence, but not everybody owns a gun. Guess what everybody owns? A butcher knife or something, in the drawer. I mean, any of us in the sound of my voice, you can go into your kitchen, you can find something that has the potential for lethality, right? And, we refer to these as weapons of opportunity. And again, this goes back to familiarity with the scene, and we don't know anything about the weapon. I've seen reports in the news where people are saying, where's the knife? Where's the knife? I have no idea. I know that when the suspect was found, he's down by USC. Still haven't figured out why he's down there. And he's not on campus. He's by USC. He's off campus, all right? So I don't know if he was down there trying to score or whatever the case might be. Why would you flee to that specific location, all right? That instrument could have been dumped along the way down there. But if it's something that he didn't own prior to, or the attacker didn't own prior to, and you walk into the kitchen, there's probably a block of knives sitting there. There's probably stuff in the drawers, that, I think this will work. A weapon of convenience. So, again, that goes to this element of familiarity with the environment, if the knife originated from there.
Yeah, and that'll be interesting to come out, because I know, and again, LAPD really haven't said anything other than the charges and the victims, and then now we're learning, about the cause and manner of death. But as far
this
as
is nothing new for LA. I mean, we've been covering Celeste Rivas now for a while, right?
Well, I bet,
I know. And listen, I don't have listen, dude, I do not have a problem with them keeping their mouth shut. Problem is, nobody in Hollywood can keep their mouth shut. So we're going to hear this, and I would urge anybody within the sound of our voice, okay, be very, very careful about what you hear, okay, and take it as the gospel until, and we have a piece here now from LA County ME. The police have made some statements, but they're not going to show this is an active double homicide that they're working, and they have the intention to charge him, and they have the intention, at least on the surface, they're going to try to prosecute him unless something changes, So that outpaces the public's need to know at this point in time. So I would urge anybody just to, kind of sit back and just watch how this develops, and kind of measure what you're hearing, coming out of these news organizations, and say, that old guy with the gray hair said, I need to listen, I need to pay attention and kind of measure, what's going on. That's why I like, in the bedroom thing with, I've heard chair and floor, I've also heard bed, and I haven't had the chief of detectives give a presser and say, they were found in this specific location at this point. We can tie things together. We also know that, God bless her, the daughter found them. I can't even begin to fathom, what this young woman's going to be going through for the rest of her life. And if the gossip lines are true, we've heard about Mr. Crystal showing up, maybe with his wife there, had a view of the body. And I don't know who else came in there. So word travels fast out there, amongst certain social groups, where, people can't help but talk about it over coffee, or whatever the case might be, cocktails. So just give it time. Let's see what happens with it.
Yeah, and I mean, People Magazine was the first, within hours, saying that they had their throats cut.
Right.
And then now the ME says, well, it's actually not just one, by the article, it made you believe that it was one cut. I mean, it's a morbid thing to say, but that's what it is. And in reality, it was multiple
Or
stab
it's a
wounds.
perceived reality at this point
Right,
in time.
right. And according to the ME, it was actually multiple stab wounds. And that really changes kind of the scene in your mind of what potentially played out.
Yes, it does.
Well, we'll see what happens next. Joseph Scott Morgan, it's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Incredible insight, professor of applied forensics.
You bet, Chris.
At
Anytime.
Jacksonville State University, as well as the host of Body Bags. Thank you for being here.
You're quite welcome.
Nick Reiner is due back in court for his arraignment January 7th. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.